So last time we were talking about the Chicago school, and although this is focused on the city of Chicago, what it also speaks to is a certain approach to sociology. In many ways, a definitive approach to sociology, as we'll talk about in a moment, is carried forth by the fine gentleman at the University of Chicago Sociology Department at the time. Keep in mind, and I'll go through this very quickly because we covered this, left off with this on Wednesday, that we talk about a shock city, and the first one that we mentioned in this particular class was Manchester, England. Again, a city that had just symbolic, significant historical growth in a very short amount of time. So we see this illustrated numerically through the most populated cities in 1850, where you see Chicago is not on the list with not even a population of 100,000, and then very quickly exploded. And you had all these people coming in a very short amount of time. As we talked about throughout, they were coming for, better economic opportunities, particularly within the job market. You had a lot of people coming from Italy, people coming from Poland, people coming from Ireland, people coming from the Black Belt South through the Great Migration. So you had all these different people coming in a short amount of time with very different customs and social norms. And as we talked about from the very beginning, that made it where the city planners really had their work cut out for them. As these people needed, places, we need to make sure that the transportation systems were in place for them to be able to move around effectively. Still ain't fully figured that out yet. Traffic is just a nightmare, seemingly all the damn time. Sanitary water supplies, again, the most important things that we talked about in the beginning in terms of being able to get a surplus is making sure that you have sufficient food and clean water. So not just water, clean water. So we had to make sure that was going to, be in place as all these people came. They were going to create a lot of waste. What were we going to do with that? Who was going to protect these people? You all may not be familiar, but the city was essentially burnt down to the ground in the 1870s due to the Great Chicago Fire. How would they make sure that something like that wouldn't happen again? They were going to need, again, police fire protection as well. People were going to bring their children and or reproduce when they got there. How are we going to educate these people? So we need to have libraries. We need to have public parks. All types of things to consider in a very short amount of time. As we talked about again, you have a huge amount of immigrants flooding into Chicago at the time who were quite unfamiliar with American customs and norms. And these norms, the violation of these norms oftentimes be explained in very racist ways and be explained by biology. These Italian people act like this because of their genetics. These Irish people behave like this because of their deviant culture. These Black people behave this way because, of their inferior design. For the scholars at the University of Chicago, this didn't really seem like satisfactory explanations. They began to see, it was true. They could not deny their observations of a great deal of social problems that began to emerge as you had this increase in population. And again, make sure you're following along with the conversation and you're not just taking notes of what you see on the screen, but that you're really processing what's being said and communicated verbally as well. As we, again, continue to walk through history. That again, you have all these people coming in a short amount of time, competing for, precious resources. They have become more desperate the more people come. And this creates, again, like a certain type of mindset and personality. As we talked about before, people become like, where the Jezreel chef and Gibbon chef that we talked about before, where there would be a sense of community and social bonds and networks, often based in ethnicity, religious norms, that many of these folks were coming from. Italians, Germans, Black Americans. You get to a place like Chicago and it becomes very alienating because, in many ways you're on your own and it's like everybody is competing against you. And that can become very isolating. You don't see as much of your cultural norms reinforced in this new place. In fact, you see many of your cultural norms frowned upon. This leads to a situation called anime, crafted by Emil Durkheim, concept which hopefully you were made familiar with in principal sociology. If not, you'll definitely be familiar with it in when you get into your graduate programs. It's created a great deal of social isolation. And anime just speaks to, anime speaks to social detachment, that the norms that you're used to are really changing. Again, of course, things are going to change where you have this many people bringing new customs and cultures. And anime is kind of a disorienting type of effect. I think our society, I know our society experienced a lot of this in 2020, where again, you're used to certain social norms and the norms just change very quickly. And that can be incredibly disoriented to any human being. And it was very much so for many human beings during this time period. It led to a lot of social isolation, again, with mental health issues, rises in depression, rises in suicide, but also more violent and aggressive behavior. You saw more juvenile delinquency. Again, you have all these kids and stuff, oftentimes in very impoverished communities, but the cost of living and again, it's just immediate and great. In smaller towns, like I said, again, the Jessel Shaft, Jim and Shaft divide, the urban and rural divide. If you were down on your luck, it would be easier to find somebody to help and assist you. In these environments, you were on your own. And pretty soon, again, like if you weren't trying to get it, you were going to get got. And this led to an increase in crime. There was more child abuse. There was no more domestic abuse. The divorce rate began to rise. So you had all these individuals who, again, didn't have as many cases. That you didn't see this kind of crime, as much back in the communities that were coming from Italy. You didn't see this level of divorce in the Black communities that they were coming from, from the South. So the University of Chicago scholars began to wonder, what is it about this environment? What is it about this environment that is making people behave so differently? That again, people that were formerly peaceful, now they become, crime criminals. People that again, has strong social ties and values and strong mental health. Now we're, feeling suicidal. The University of Chicago did not believe that all of a sudden these people's genetic and biological makeup had changed once they entered Chicago city limits. It had to be something about the environment that was creating these changes, they believe. So when they talk about social disorganization, when we think about, a lot of times when we look at the people that come from these communities, we look at the people sometimes as disorganized. And there's something wrong with these Italian people. There's something wrong with these Polish people. The University of Chicago academics began to scrutinize this and suggested it wasn't that it was socially disorganized people, but it was more socially disorganized communities.
Dr. Muhammad.
Yes, sir.
What time period was this?
This is the early 20th century.
So this would be before like
as it says here, on this first slide that we went over on Tuesday, and it says in the book, the time period is all listed here. So we talked about last time urban ecology. When you hear the word ecology, it speaks to environment. So as opposed to, again, if there's something wrong with these individuals, it was like maybe there's something wrong with this environment. And if we, as opposed to, okay, let's correct these Italian peoples, they'd be more like, the good Anglo-Americans, then maybe let's do something about this environment. So they, again, the University of Chicago sociology department professors, they set out to study the environment. Then let's actually go into these neighborhoods. Greektown, Little Italy, Back of the Yards, Bronzeville, communities in Chicago that still have much of the cultural makeup that they had back during this time. Some of the same pathology still exists, actually. And what they found is that this environment, and as always, when you see something in italics, make sure that you study it closely. And these notes only help you if you look at them. Like, so again, questions like what time period this is are confusing because this is writing your notes. And if you wrote this down, it should be something that actually sticks. If you're just writing it down and it's not something that you're going to look at again, it's not very helpful for you. As always, this lecture is recorded and will be available for you all if you need to review anything else. So it's speaking to how this environment began to create a certain psychology, that it wasn't just, okay, that there's something about these individuals, that the environment changes these individuals. It changes the way that you see the world. They're studying this in Chicago, Illinois, our world's greatest city. But they began to quickly conclude that this was not just a byproduct of Chicago, that these things that they were observing here in the streets of Chicago will be true in almost any city. Let's look at the urban state of mind a little bit more closely. Again, as we go through this, make sure we keep up to speed with the reading. Again, the textbooks are on reserve in the library, so please make sure that you make a trip there at least 2-3 times a week to make sure that you get access to that material. It will be very challenging to comprehend this material fully without doing so.
Dr. Muhammad, I had asked that question because it was sounding like you were saying something about drugs. And I thought drugs like the crack epidemic and stuff didn't come until like the 80s and the 90s and stuff. That's why I had asked that question.
So again, they speak to how the city is not just a geographical place, but it's also a state of mind. That when we think of New York, when we think of New Orleans, when we think of Philadelphia, these are not just physical places, but the people of these cities make these places what they are. That not only did the environment change, again, these Italian, Polish, Irish immigrants, they also changed the city itself. So there's a 2-level approach to this. The biotic, where again, your biology will be affected, where again, in Harlem, New York, the life expectancy is far shorter than just a few blocks away in downtown Manhattan. There are locales, I know this used to be true of Chicago, I'm not sure if this is true now, but it used to have one of the highest proportion of like asthmatic babies in the world. As you know, again, the environment was not, the healthiest. We saw this like, with a place, in really, tragic ways in Flint, Michigan. So the physical environment, we saw this with Hurricane Katrina. Again, the natural environment had an impact upon, the makeup of the city. And New Orleans is a good example in talking about the cultural, in that a large part of the culture of New Orleans, what we think of as being just kind of this free and open place, is in many ways that ways because of the Black population historically. And it also speaks to, again, that when you move to a certain city, that, there is a symbolic and psychological adjustment required. That the norms that you may have, living in like a small town like Mokina, Illinois, it's going to be different. You're going to have to adjust some things, again, in Chicago, Illinois. But within this, right, we talked about before the urban and rural divide that kind of like, sees urban environments as a place where you don't have community. Park and Burgess, some of the scholars at the University of Chicago, and you won't have to be tested on names for this course. The concepts will be very important, but the names will not be as much. What they found was that there actually was community. There were many small communities located in the city, but these communities were often very isolated from one another. So very quickly you would have, again, like I said, Greektown. It's a real place where, again, when Greek people came to Chicago, they moved to that area of the city. Little Italy. Again, when Italian people came over, they flocked to that part of the city. Bronzeville, again, on the south side of Chicago, is an area where it was implicitly understood and forced by law at times that this is the area where, Black people settle. So people coming up from Mississippi, South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, they were going to be flooding to Bronzeville more than likely. And within that, you did have community. You did have people that looked out for each other. You did have like some cultural norms that would be reproduced. But these communities, again, were very isolated and segregated from one another. That remains true today. Again, statistically speaking, this is not, speaking off the cuff, that through most of the 20th century, Chicago, along with Birmingham, Alabama, were the two most segregated cities in America. Where, again, all the white folks live over here, all the Black people live over here, all the Hispanic folks live over here, all the Asian people live over here. It's still very much like that, changing somewhat. And for the most part, quite frankly, it's changing in areas that used to formerly be Black, is more and more white folks moving into a lot of these areas. And we're seeing that all across the country. We'll talk about that later on in the second half of the class as we get into gentrification. But one view of the Chicago school was that, as we talked about right before, again, the urban and rural divide, one of the things you have to write about in your paper is the political divide in this regard. And you see that, again, that, attitudes about, legalization of marijuana, attitudes about gay marriage, attitudes about, divorce and things of that nature, abortion. This doesn't mean, again, that you don't have people that oppose all of those things and people that have biases and prejudices that live in cities. You do, for sure. But because you have so many different types of people, it does create a certain level of tolerance in terms of different norms. Everybody had different norms. Again, if you're an Italian person, you're coming up there and you're being discriminated against and being looked at sideways, it makes it more difficult for you to do that for some other group. A little bit more before we break for the day. We'll close a little bit early today. So there are three factors to determine urbanism. And urbanism, again, refers to a state of mind, again, a perspective in how to see the world that I think that I very much have adopted. So the three main factors, again, make sure that you're preparing for the quiz. This would definitely be a question that you could get asked. Size, again, the more people there are. Density, meaning like are those people, again, where you get all these people crammed, flooding into the city, are they all on top of each other, or is it a little bit more spread out? So things like places like Chicago, New York, not only is it a lot of people, they're crowded into a smaller space. We're like Nashville, for example, which has a much smaller population than Chicago. I learned this last year, I forgot how, but Nashville actually geographically is bigger, but for far fewer people. A consequence of these factors is, and again, some of this is overstated, in absence of personal relationships, as again, people become more impersonal to one another. As we talked about in previous classes, the main basis of relationships is economics. And just a breakdown of social structure that leads to, personal security and stability, that broke down in places like Chicago. We'll leave it there for now. When we begin on Monday, and again, please make sure that you get up to speed on the reading as quickly as possible. That even though we talk about all these people come to urban environments and they very quickly develop kind of an urban attitude in how they see the world, it would be short-sighted and incomplete for us to come away and thinking that there's only one type of urban experience. So on Monday, we're going to begin by looking at the 5 urban ways of life that were described by the University of Chicago scholars. Make sure that you keep working towards the writing assignments. Those are coming up due pretty quickly. It'd be a good decision for you all to submit a rough draft well ahead of the process. I think you have until the 8th to do that. And of course, I'm always available for office hour meetings. This lecture, again, is being recorded, will be posted shortly. Y'all have a wonderful weekend.